Hello, this is Anthony from Mobile Jiu-Jitsu, and welcome to the first episode of Why This Fight Matters. Tomorrow night, we have the rematch between Brendan Allen and Chris, the Action Man Curtis. Now, it can feel a little bit like on the road to UFC 300 that this particular fight card doesn't matter. This is just filler. This is just time wasting, and this is a card that was basically stolen from so that we could have a really good fight card next Saturday for UFC 300. And while some of those feelings may actually be justified, I actually want to share with you why this fight actually has a lot of importance to the middleweight division, has a lot of importance to the UFC as a whole. So I want to start off talking about Chris Curtis versus Brendan Allen and why this fight matters. Brendan Allen is on a big winning streak that stretches back all the way to the last time that he fought Chris Curtis. During that time, he's gotten 6 straight wins and 3 performance of the night bonuses. Those are big time wins that he has under his belt where people were really impressed. And if he can beat Chris Curtis, then the only UFC loss on his record left to avenge will be to the former champion, Sean Strickland himself. That leaves a pretty interesting opportunity for him to have a nice call out. Hey, I want to fight you, Sean Strickland. I'd love to have that be a title eliminator. And I mean, honestly, if he beats Sean Strickland, then what argument is there that he doesn't belong at the top of the middleweight division? It's hard to imagine a better person to beat at the top of that division. If Chris, however, can shut out Brendan again, if he can knock him out. In the first fight, he knocked him out, took care of business in the second round, and it was a big showing for him. If he can do that again, he can catapult himself to the top of the top 10 of the middleweight division and start building some momentum for a run at that title. Now, he's had a little bit of a hard time. He hasn't been as consistent lately as a fighter, but Chris Curtis, make no mistake, when he's at the top of his game, he is one of the most dangerous fighters in the UFC. I remember watching him back in PFL, and it just felt like at times, man, when he was on, he was laser focused, he was unstoppable. He had some great showings against other fighters as well that maybe they were just tough outs for him. Guys like Magomed Karimov is the guy's name. Guys like Ray Cooper III. And when those guys were on, man, it was hard. It was a hard fight, but Chris Curtis has shown again and again that he's a tough guy. He's beaten competition that no one thought he could beat. I remember him coming into the UFC for the first time against Phil Hawes, and he just proved. Phil Hawes at the time was a top prospect. This was a guy that people were talking about, kind of like he was like John Jones when he first appeared on The Ultimate Fighter. And then, now you have Chris Curtis come and knock him out. Nobody talks about Phil Hawes like a big contender anymore or a big prospect anymore. So if he can shut him down, he can start to move his way up the ladder. It creates a very interesting situation. Now, I think we all really enjoy when we see a fight and there's a guy who's an up-and-comer and he's someone like Brendan Allen who's just proved again and again and again why we have faith in him. But I think we all also really appreciate when a fighter who's more experienced can turn back the clock a little bit, so to speak. I mean, Chris Curtis is only a few years older than I am. He's 3 years older than I am. He's not an old man. But in the sport of fighting, it is a little bit difficult to have that momentum the older you get. So for him to turn back the clock a little bit, get that win over Brendan Allen would be a huge statement in the middleweight division. I want to let you know about a couple other fights that are going on tomorrow night, just in case you didn't know, don't know why you should be excited. In some of these other fights, we've basically got some kind of almost loser leaves town kind of matches in our co-main event. Not that they'll necessarily get cut, and I certainly don't hope that they do, but if we take a look at Damon Jackson versus Alexander Hernandez in the co-main event, Damon has won 3 of his last 5, but he's on a 2-fight losing streak. And Alexander Hernandez has only won 2 of his last 5. Now, Alex Hernandez, at a certain point, was another guy that seemed like a top prospect, seemed like someone that was going to do something real big, and then he got turned away that first time in the UFC by Donald Cerrone, and he hasn't quite looked the same, hasn't had the same shine to him ever since. And so it's going to be real exciting to see who's going to come out on top in this situation. Damon Jackson is a guy who I think is incredibly talented, a guy who I think has all the potential in the world. But Alexander Hernandez is not a joke. So it's going to be really interesting to see. I do think that match tends to favor Damon Jackson just because of the skill sets that they have. But you never know. And Alexander Hernandez, like I said, that guy is no joke. That guy's got some legit ability inside the octagon. We also have a fight between Ignacio Bahamundes and Christos Gigos. Bahamundes is super tough, but he's coming off of a loss. It's going to be interesting to see. He was on a 3-fight win streak, one of those guys from Dana White's Contender Series that people really thought a lot of coming off the Contender Series. And he had kind of a surprising loss his last fight out, so it's going to be real interesting to see how he bounces back. Fighters, when they take a loss, there's something interesting that happens where sometimes they don't perform up to their abilities because it's in their head because of that last loss. And so I'm real interested to see how Bahamundes bounces back after that. I think he's got the mental toughness. He's had losses before in his career, and so I think that he's not going to let that stop him. I think he's going to really shine tomorrow night. Christos Gigos, unfortunately, I think that the UFC has put him up right now as a basically sacrificial lamb. This is kind of what you do in boxing, where you have a tune-up fight. You have that fight where you have a guy who's kind of had a loss or maybe he's on his way up, and you just want to get him a win. And so you put him up against a guy who's got a good name, a guy who's fought some good fighters, but maybe hasn't performed to the best of his ability. I think that's what the UFC is doing with Christos Gigos. Now, like I said earlier with Chris Curtis, I love seeing matches where a guy is set up like the sacrificial lamb and comes back on top and really shows out. And I would love to see that tomorrow night, but we'll find out. We also, in the sacrificial lamb category, and I hate to, as a person who's trained in MMA as well a little bit, mostly jiu-jitsu, but as a person who's trained, it sucks to talk about a fighter in those ways, but I'm just talking about how the UFC and the matchmakers, I think, have put this card together. I don't think of these fighters as sacrificial lambs in any way, shape, or form. These guys are incredible athletes, incredible martial artists, but I do think they've set up another fighter in exactly the same way. In the heavyweight division, this is a really interesting matchup. We've got Walter Walker, who is undefeated. He's coming in again against Lucas Brzeski, I believe is how his name is said. Brzeski has fought in the UFC 3 times. He's got 3 losses, and he's going up against a guy in Walter Walker who has been unstoppable in the heavyweight division up to this point. I think that what they're trying to do is give Walter that opportunity to have the successful debut in the UFC, look like a champ doing it, and then start his climb up the heavyweight division, which we'll see if he's able to pull that off. So we never know what's going to happen, but honestly, the way this match is set up, I think that they're really counting on Walter to come in and just take him out. Couple of interesting fights, at the beginning of the card, middle of the card for up-and-comers. You've got Charlie Campbell versus Trevor Peek. They're both up-and-comers, and they've only got 3 decision wins between the 2 of them. Going to be looking for some knockouts here. They've both got a lot of knockout wins on their records, and that's exactly what they're going to be looking to do on Saturday night. And I think that that's probably what we'll see. The odds of this going to decision are probably pretty low, but I can't make any guarantees. There's a saying, and the saying is, that's why they fight. You just never know until they get in there. And the last fight we'll let you know about here is Morgan Charret, I believe I said that right, versus Chepe Mariscal. Charret is a very impressive guy. He's fought in the LFA, he's fought in CFFC, and he's fought in Cage Warriors. And for those of you who are not aware of kind of some of those promotions, there's like the big league, the major promotions. I know that the UFC is at the top of the heap, ONE FC, or I believe it's just ONE now, but they're at the top of the heap in terms of the level of competition. And the next step down, still big promotions, would be PFL and Bellator. But at the same time, you've got these lower promotions, places like LFA, places like CFFC and Cage Warriors, and these are basically like feeding grounds. These are like the major leagues of the smaller shows in MMA. And so when you get a guy who's fought in all 3 like Charret has, this is a guy who I'm very interested in seeing fight. So we're going to find out what he's made out of. I think that this is going to be good. This is another one with 2 guys who are finishers and who are hungry up-and-comers. Chepe Mariscal is a guy who he doesn't have many decision wins either, and he's looking to come in on top and get the win. And they're both well-rounded guys. They've got submissions under their belt. They've got knockouts under their belt, and I believe we'll see a good matchup. And we'll see what comes of this fight card. But I'm super excited about the Chris Curtis, Brendan Allen fight. I think that that's really interesting to see. And I think we all love an upset. I think that Chris is coming in as an underdog. Man, I love watching Chris Curtis fight. This is a guy who I think deserves so much respect and has derailed some hype trains in the past. I'm looking forward to seeing the possibility of him doing that again. Brendan Allen, though, I think he's pretty legit. So we're going to see what's going to happen. In terms of picks, I don't like to do that so much. It's not really what I want to do in terms of this channel, but I do want to say that the reason why this fight matters is because it sets up some possible big matches in the middleweight division, and we can see a huge upset tomorrow night and something that kind of shakes up the whole middleweight division on our way to UFC 300. So thank you guys so much. Thank you for watching. I don't know if anyone's watching at this point. It's probably like 5 people. But make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon.